Hey folks, tonight we're diving into the miserable life of a medieval thief, promising quick cash and thrilling night escapades, but usually delivering something else entirely. Life back then was filthy, dangerous, and often ended by the ripe old age of 23 if you were lucky. So before you get comfy, take a sec to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I'm doing here. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always fun to see who's tuning in from around the globe. Now, turn off the lights, fire up a fan for some white noise, and let's enjoy tonight's little journey together. So, you just woke up in medieval Europe. You're broke, hungry, and your only marketable skill is having decent legs. Congrats, you're now a prime candidate for a life as a petty thief. But let's get one thing clear. No one wants to be a thief. This isn't a rebellious lifestyle choice. No 14th century kid woke up saying, "When I grow up, I want to steal pies and dodge pitchforks." This isn't Ocean's 11. It's desperation. Season 3 with extra mud. The economy's working against you. Pay's laughable. Assuming you can even find a job. Most peasants just scrape by. Cracked lips, lost teeth, and fingers probably frozen off. If the crops fail, or your lord decides taxes include your last chicken and half your dignity, you're begging or borrowing things you'll never pay back. Sure, you could try honest work. Yeah, right. The problem honest jobs in the Middle Ages usually meant 14-hour days of back-breaking labor, followed by a dinner of barley gruel and judgment, and even then, your boss might pay you with a potato, a handshake, or a promise you'll be famous if you work hard. Meanwhile, the baker's coin purse looks fat and unattended. So yeah, people stole not because they were criminal masterminds, but because it was usually a choice between stealing or dying as scenery. But here's the kicker. You didn't need to be a mastermind to be a criminal. Stealing one loaf of bread, that's theft. Picking up an apple that fell off a cart, also theft. Chasing a runaway chicken into someone else's yard. Guess what trespassing and possibly conspiring to traffic poultry. And once you're knee-deep in that legal mud, you're caught. Now you're that guy. And in an age where gossip travels faster than a cart, and memories last forever, especially the juicy stuff it sticks. So, suppose you're committed to thievery, you're scrappy, motivated, and you've tied a rag around your face to look mysterious. Great. Time to pick a target. Except, good luck with that. You see, the biggest problem with being a medieval thief, besides the constant risk of being hanged, is that nobody has anything worth stealing. Most villagers are so poor they can't afford new shoes. Like potatoes, good for neither dinner nor pillows. An average peasant might own one pair of pants, 2 spoons, and a goat named after a family member. Their house is mud, sticks, and hope. No jewelry, no coin purse. Some don't even have a purse. They just tie their stuff into scraps of cloth and pray for the best. You might get excited spotting someone at market with a bulging bag, only to find it's full of beet seeds and a dead rat. Congrats. You just risked your neck for rodent protein. Think the nobles are better targets. They have gold, sure, but also guards, dogs, fortresses, and a weird enthusiasm for punishing anyone who messes with their hats. You basically had to choose between stealing or starving to death looking like a statue. But here's the kicker: you didn't have to do much to become a criminal. Steal a loaf of bread. That's theft. Pick up a stray apple that fell from a cart. Also theft. Chase after a runaway chicken and accidentally wander into someone else's garden. Guess what? Now you're trespassing and possibly plotting to traffic poultry. Once you dip your toe into that legal swamp, you're spotted. You're that guy now. And in an age when gossip travels faster than a cart and memories last forever, especially when drama's involved, that stuff sticks. So let's say you've committed to a life of theft. You're tough, you've got drive, you've even tied a rag around your face to look mysterious. Cool, time to pick a target. Except, good luck with that. The biggest problem with being a thief in the Middle Ages, besides the constant risk of hanging, was that nobody had anything worth stealing. Most villagers were so poor they couldn't even afford new shoes, like potatoes that aren't enough for dinner or a pillow. An average peasant might own one pair of pants, 2 spoons, and a goat named after a family member. Their houses were made of mud, sticks, and sheer optimism. No jewelry, no coin purses. Some didn't even have purses. They just tied stuff up in scraps and hoped for the best. You might get excited spotting someone at the market with a bulging bag, only to find it stuffed with beet seeds and a dead rat. Congrats. You just risked your life for rat protein. Think the nobles are better targets. Sure, they have gold, but they also have guards, dogs, fortresses, and an unhealthy passion for punishing anyone who messes with their hats the wrong way. Robbing a noble is like walking into a beehive holding a torch and hoping the bees say please. Then there's the clergy. Sure, the church has silver chalices and crosses, but also locked doors, God's judgment, and more importantly, the whole town gossiping by lunchtime. Steal from the church and everyone knows by lunch. Plus, you might get cursed, even if you're not superstitious. That curse will wreck your week. And don't even think about grave robbing. First off, medieval cemeteries weren't exactly Fort Knox. They were barely organized. You could spend half the night digging just to find, well, I'll let you imagine the disappointment. Uncover a pile of rocks and one very annoyed mole. Plus, digging up bodies meant everyone assumed you were into black magic, which brought a whole new set of problems. Being a thief in medieval Europe required some serious stealth skills, sneaking around in the shadows, tiptoeing past snoozing guards, vanishing into the mist like some mysterious, misunderstood anti-hero. Dream big, the reality: you smell like a sack of boiled onions stuffed into goat socks. Hygiene wasn't exactly a thing back then. Baths were rare, soap was pricey, and deodorant hadn't been invented yet, unless you stuffed your clothes with dried herbs and hoped folks mistook you for a walking salad. Thieves definitely didn't live the comfy life. Most crashed in hay piles, alleys, or under pigsties. You absorbed your surroundings, not poetically, but literally about 30% barnyard by now. So when you creep behind someone at the market, they don't hear you coming. They smell you. You might as well wear a sign that says, Haven't seen clean water since Lent. Your clothes don't help either. Most thieves wore the same outfit every day because it was the only one they had. After a few nights hiding in chimneys or behind fish stalls, that outfit developed its own personality, the kind of personality that could clear a room. What's worse, your job demanded physical activity, running, jumping, ducking, all while wrapped in scratchy wool that traps every stinky molecule like a cursed sponge. You're a walking crime scene. Guards don't even need dogs to track you. They just follow the faint trail of sweat, mold, and bad life choices. Hear that? Know well. I can smell it. Not exactly the mysterious vibe most thieves hope for. And if you think you can blend into the crowd and make a clean getaway, think again. Medieval crowds were full of unwashed humans. Yeah, but you were worse. Somehow, you stood out. You were humanity's walking warning. Hard to go unnoticed when everyone around you is silent and cracking open windows. Dogs, man's best friend. Unless, of course, you're a medieval thief. Then dogs are traitors' pointy-toothed snitches. Every village, farm, and roadside tavern had one. Not the cute floppy-eared tail waggers we know today. Nope. These were skinny, half-wild beasts, covered in scars, named stuff like Chopper or Bitey, with the mood of a drunk blacksmith suffering gout. You don't pet them. You pray they don't sniff you out through the fog. For thieves, dogs were the worst security system. Cheap, loyal, and quick to lose their temper at just about anything. No matter how quietly you move, it doesn't matter. Stepping on twigs, bark. Sneezing into your sleeve, bark. Breathing softly near the pantry door, better believe you'll hear the barking. And now the whole street knows you're trying to liberate that cheese wheel. And they're not just noisy, they're fast. Dogs can cross muddy yards in seconds. Meanwhile, you're slipping on cabbage leaves and tripping over buckets. Suddenly, this quick job turns into a mad dash between your dodgy heart and a set of yellowed fangs. Getting bitten isn't even the worst part. The real problem is, once a dog hates you, it hates you forever. It never forgets. Medieval dogs had memories like grudge-holding grandparents. You could rob a bakery one spring, and 3 months later, that dog's waiting outside the tavern, ready for round two. Worse, townsfolk loved their dogs more than their own relatives. If a guard dog barks at you, no questions asked. Oh, look, there's Bitey barking. Must be a thief. Grab a pitchfork and tell the priest to prep the confession chair. You can't bribe them, reason with them, or outrun. Get to their relatives. If a guard dog barks at you, no one's gonna ask questions. Oh, Bitey's barking, definitely a thief. Grab a pitchfork and tell the priest to get the confession chair ready. You can't bribe them, reason with them, or outrun them forever. They don't care if you're just stealing a loaf of bread for your starving siblings. To them, you're an intruder and your legs are chew toys. Here's the kicker. Most medieval houses didn't have locks, not because everyone was super trusting, but because locks were expensive, complicated, and usually reserved for places like monasteries, city gates, or heavy-duty treasure chests holding 3 rusty spoons and the toenail clippings of a saint. So, yeah, you might think, perfect target, easy pickings. For me, the nimble village thief? Nope. Locks were rare, but traps, those were everywhere. Folks couldn't afford keys, so they got creative. By creative, I mean aggressively hostile. It all started with the front door. Most of them weren't doors at all, just creaky wooden boards groaning like tortured souls whenever you touched them. Try to open one quietly, and boom, you set off an alarm louder than the church bell, and that was the easy part. Many villagers hung crude bells on strings just inside, medieval motion detectors. Pull the door, jingle, jangle, jingle. Whole house wakes up, baby crying, dogs barking, someone yells. Grab the pitchfork, surprise is gone, and so might be your finger, then come back up defenses. Some folks placed buckets of water on top of the door, others scattered dry twigs on the floor, so any sneaky step would crunch like stomping on an angry bowl of granola. Out in the countryside, traps often included sharp farming tools, low beams, or in one documented case, a welcome mat made of porcupine quills. And let's not forget the poultry alarm system. Chickens. You'd think they're neutral, but nope. Medieval chickens were anxious screamers, freaking out the moment they sensed movement. Just a light tap, and suddenly your courtyard sounds like a demonic choir. And if you somehow get past that door, congrats. Now you meet the family goose. The goose is the unwanted love child of a burglar alarm, bodyguard, and emotional terrorist. They don't just honk, they charge with their beaks and hold grudges like pros. Bottom line, no locks don't mean welcome. It means, bring it on, we dare you. Every farmer was a part-time security expert, not because they were paranoid, but because they had stuff worth protecting. And no spare spoons. Let's say you somehow dodged the angry dog, the suspicious goose, and the door screaming like a burning ghost. You're inside. Success. Now just sneak past the sleeping family and grab a bag of coins. Except here's the bad news. Nobody really slept in the Middle Ages. People didn't sleep in peaceful REM cycles, but like anxious squirrels. Half awake, one ear perked, often clutching a sharp object. See? Living in the Middle Ages was a contact sport. Robbers, plagues, taxes, wild animals. It was a daily buffet of potential disasters. So when people went to bed, it wasn't peaceful. They slept with one eye, wide open, and their favorite stabbing tool close by. And we're not talking swords or daggers. We're talking fireplace pokers, pitchforks, ladles for skull smashing, and occasionally suspiciously sharpened spoons. If it could dent your forehead, it was bedtime. Even family farmers didn't trust the dark. Parents slept, huddled with kids, not out of love, but because it made it easier to protect the whole gang from a bunch of angry Tetris blocks. You know, like human Tetris, but way more pissed off. And don't think there was a guest room for you to sneak through. Medieval houses basically had one big room. If you were lucky, a bed, if not, just straw mats and a snoring goat. You couldn't walk without stepping on someone's cousin or a lump of butter. You weren't sneaking around. You were dodging obstacles like a medieval ninja warrior. Oh, And don't forget the soundtrack. Every house had creaky floors, flickering firelight, and at least one sleep talker. And don't forget the soundtrack. Every house had creaky floors, flickering firelight, and that one person who always sleep talked. Plenty of thieves got caught mid-robbery because someone suddenly shouted, "Hey, you stole my pie," in their sleep, and everyone snapped awake. The truth is, no one could get deep sleep in the Middle Ages. They just needed to conserve energy to survive and face another miserable day. And if the floor creaked at the wrong time, it wasn't just a noise, it was an invitation to attack something. Getting caught stealing back then wasn't just a bad day, it was a lifestyle change. And not the, "Oh, I learned my lesson" kind. More like they burned a letter into your face, and now even the village goats judge you. Yep, branding was real. And not the cool kind where you get a personal style and Insta followers. Nope. This was hot iron searing your skin, courtesy of the local cops, with all the tenderness of a bear trap. Steal once and you're labeled for life, usually a T for thief, a V for vagrant, or sometimes just a fancy line on your forehead because creativity was limited, but cruelty overflowing. It wasn't about justice, it was about visibility. Medieval justice believed shame was contagious. That way, everyone knew what you did, even if you weren't doing it now. Imagine wearing a name tag that says, "Hi, I steal stuff," except it's written in scars and judgment. Once branded, "Good luck with anything. Want a job?" Nope. Want to rent a room at the inn? Forget it. Want to buy carrots without the seller freaking out? Think again. Worse. Branding wasn't always done by pros. Sometimes it was the local blacksmith after a few beers. Sometimes a priest who swore he read about it in a book. The results mixed. Sometimes it looked like a letter. Sometimes your face looked like it lost a wrestling match with a fireplace. And God help you if you got caught a second time. Then they had to get creative new stamp locations, finger chopping, shaving. Half your head, basically the medieval version of cancel culture. In theory, medieval justice was a thing. In reality, it looked like 20 angry villagers, a shady accusation, and a pitchfork with opinions. Welcome to trial by mob, the criminal justice system for thieves caught in the act, or just unlucky enough to look suspicious near someone else's pie. See, if a medieval mob thought you stole something, they didn't call a lawyer, they called everyone else. Neighbors, shopkeepers, clueless but enthusiastic kids. Suddenly, your problem wasn't the law anymore. Your problem was Marjorie, who still remembers that weird look you gave her geese 2 months ago. And once the mob gathered, forget innocence until proven guilty. This idea existed about 500 years ago, right before the Enlightenment. You felt guilty the second someone yelled, "That's him." You'd feel worse if your clothes were torn, your hair a mess, or you lived somewhere no one heard the scream. Your trial usually started with shouting, escalated to grabbing, and ended with something flying at your head, maybe a shoe, a turnip, or a goat. Medieval mobs were unpredictable but loyal. If you were lucky, an official showed up a cop, maybe a monk if you were super lucky, but usually you got the local justice treatment tied to a post in the square, while folks took turns explaining how their day was ruined just because of you. Circumstantial evidence, volume-based verdicts, creative sentencing, sometimes public shaming, hanging, nailing, or forced to wear a sign saying I steal eggs and lie to my aunt. Sometimes a beating. Sometimes they dunked you in the river while people shouted things like confess, and I told you he looks like a sock thief. Complaints. It was creative punishment. Sometimes public shaming, hanging, nailing, or forced to wear a sign saying I stole eggs and lied to my aunt. Sometimes a beating. Sometimes they dunked you in a river while people yelled things like confess, and I told you he looked like a sock thief. Complaints. None. Defense. You could try yelling not me, but that mostly made people throw stuff harder. The mob's justice isn't. Bout the truth. Its goal is quick. Brutal closure. You're caught. The crowds had their fun. Maybe they won't kill you. Congrats. Instead, you're branded a public embarrassment. Enter the stocks. Now. If you're imagining a quiet moment to reflect on your life choices, nope, stocks aren't. Enter the stocks. And no, if you're picturing a quiet time to reflect on your life choices, think again. Stocks aren't some light punishment. They're medieval entertainment. You're the star, just not a very good one, like a local improv troupe made entirely of humiliation and leg cramps. First, let's define them. Stocks are big wooden frames used to lock your ankles and sometimes wrists right in place. You sit there awkwardly in the town square, hunched like a wonky folding chair, limbs stretched out, and your dignity clearly visible on your shoes. And you stay there for hours, sometimes days, rain, cold, snow, just lovely. Pigeons perch on your head. Welcome to your new normal. But weather isn't the worst part. People are there too. Passers-by are encouraged to loudly and creatively mock you. They throw stuff trash, rotten food, poop, whatever's handy and gross. Kids especially love this. It's like a community bonding moment, kind of like a holiday, but smellier and way less private. Hey, that's the guy who stole the blacksmith's sausages, someone shouts. Then the sausage, now ancient and sad, gets hurled straight into your face, and don't think you can dodge it. Stocks are designed to be annoying. Your feet go numb. Your back aches. Snot runs down your nose, while villagers compose folk songs about your criminal ineptitude. You might get lucky if a sympathetic friend sneaks you some bread, but odds are someone's already stolen your food while mocking your thief resume. That's medieval irony for you, and let's not forget the long-term effects. After your public stock session, you get marked not physically, but socially. People remember you as that stock guy. It sticks to you longer than cabbage in your hair, and if you think stocks are the mildest punishment, think again, compared to what comes next. Stocks are basically a spa day, branding, mutilation, or a one-way ticket to the gallows, courtesy of local execution enthusiasts. By medieval standards, whipping was considered humane, not because it didn't hurt. Oh, it did, but because you still had limbs, life, and a chance to hobble home afterward in a world where punishments could mean branding, dismemberment, or community bonding that ends in a funeral. An old school flogging was practically polite. Let's begin the story. You get caught stealing, maybe a loaf of bread or someone's spare boots. You're dragged to the town square, surrounded by folks who clearly have nothing better to do, and the local authorities nod in approval. The leather whip comes out not the Hollywood kind. It's more like a rough rope or knotted leather strip wielded by someone either really enthusiastic or just having a bad day. You're tied to a post, always in public. So the whole town gets a free show. You can go shirtless, but only because your tattered clothes offer no protection. No musical number, just the sting of rope on skin and someone in the crowd saying stuff like, "Serves him right." I always suspected he looked like a sausage thief anyway. The point isn't just pain, it's deterrence. You're not just punished, you're a walking, talking lesson. Steal, and it might happen to you. The whip repeating like a very passionate, motivational speaker. Different lash counts, 5, 10, 20, depending on your crime, the judge's mood, or whether the executioner pulled a shoulder that day. And if you faint halfway through, no worries. They just stop, splash water on your face, then get back to it. Hydration is key. But here's the thing, if you get whipped, it means someone decided not to take it further. You're not locked up forever. A break. They just stop, splash water on your face, then move on. Hydration is important, after all. But here's the thing, if you're getting whipped, someone decided not to go all the way. You're not locked up forever. You're not branded or worse. You're punished, yes, punished, then released, bruised, humiliated, but alive. So you just stole a wallet, maybe a chunk of cheese. Nice job. You're running away. Now what? Well, unless you have a perfectly timed horse waiting behind the tannery. And honestly, you don't. Your escape looks like a clumsy walk through mud while villagers yell, "Stop thief," and someone's grandma tries to trip you with a broom. Medieval towns weren't exactly designed for breaking out. Narrow, twisty streets jammed with carts, pigs, or some dude yelling at a monk. The cobblestones are uneven, and if it just rained, as usual, your ankles are swimming in some mystery mix of mud, straw, regret, and whatever was on your shoes. Don't get your hopes up. You're probably rocking old leather shoes, tied with string or worse, barefoot, running from an angry butcher with bleeding feet, humbling to say the least. You might think, I'll duck into an alley. Great. Except most alleys aren't alleys. They're dead ends or worse, public toilets. Many bold escapes ended, tragically thanks to a surprise wall or some waist-high grossness best left unnamed. Even if you escape, the village, the countryside isn't your friend either. Open fields make you a sitting duck, and forests are full of folks just like you, ready to rob you the second you step in with a stolen sausage and a fresh wound. Hard to enjoy your loot when another crook's eyeing it too. And don't forget the locals. They're not just sitting around saying, "Oh, we'll let the guards handle it." Nope. Chasing thieves is a team sport. Farmers, merchants, kids, even that guy who loves yelling all join the chase. And they're not just doing their civic duty. They just want in on the action. So you've dodged mud, forks, and maybe kept your stolen sausage. Time to lie low and regroup. But here's the kicker. Medieval criminals weren't some lovable rogue gang. They were a bunch of opportunists, outcasts, and the kind who'd steal everything you own while helping you hide. See, the term organized crime is pretty optimistic for medieval Europe. Thieves didn't run classy guilds or gather in candlelit pubs debating honor codes. They squatted in crumbling buildings, fought over breadcrumbs, and backstabbed each other for half a loaf and a pat on the head from the local sheriff. They weren't your allies. They were your competition. The worse things got, the nastier the thieves. You're not sitting with Robin Hood. You're stuck with some guy named Rancid Thomas who once bit a dude over a turnip. He'll sell you out in a heartbeat. Then sell your shoes a minute later. Trust is a luxury, and loyalty comes second to self-preservation. If you've got a safe hideout, someone will find it and borrow your stuff. If you've got food, suddenly you're everyone's best friend until you pass out. Worse, these folks attract attention you don't want drunken street brawls, yelling about stolen spoons, getting caught naming everyone they've ever met, including you, your cousin, and maybe even your goat. It's a poorly managed circus, and if you dare to rise above and be a code-cracking thief, you're still lumped in with the worst of the worst. 2. Townsfolk. A thief's a thief. Doesn't matter if you steal to survive, while others rob churches and insult chickens. In the public eye, you're all part of the same rotten, immoral pie. You might imagine, getting caught means prison, a medieval stone dungeon with iron bars, straw beds, and a sorry cellmate named Gareth. Maybe you picture rats, a slow rescue boat, and someone shoving bread through the bars. Wrong. Medieval prisons weren't punishment centers. They held pens, glorified broom closets. Even if you somehow became a code-savvy thief, you're still in the worst crowd. 2. Townsfolk. A thief is a thief. Doesn't matter if you steal to survive while others rob churches and insult chickens. To the public, you're all part of the same rotten, immoral pie. Imagine getting caught meant going to prison, a medieval stone dungeon with bars, straw beds, and a miserable roommate named Gareth. Maybe you picture rats, a slow rescue boat, and someone shoving bread through the door cracks. Wrong. Medieval prisons weren't about punishment. They were holding pens, broom closets glorified for people waiting to be publicly shamed, fined, or if your week was really terrible, executed. If you were lucky enough to be thrown in jail. And that's a sentence no one wants. It wasn't an institution, but a damp hole in the ground. Literally. Many prisons were dug underground beneath castles, town halls, or someone's storage shed. No ventilation or optional sanitation. You weren't serving time. You're tossed into a communal pit with anyone who pissed off the authorities that week. Drunks, arsonists, suspicious-looking farmers, some guy who accidentally insulted the bishop's horse. All of you packed in like sad, soggy sardines. No beds, no blankets. Food only if some saint feels like it, or if your family bribes the guard with coins, gifts, or a really nice turnip. If not, you survive on scraps, rainwater, and your own terrible decisions. Then boredom kicks in. No trials, no schedule, just sitting there, sniffing what could legally be called weapons. Sometimes you wait for a trial. Other times, you wait for some bigwig to remember you exist. Of course, not everyone got locked up. If your crime was serious enough, or the prison was full, you'd be chained outside in the rain for all to see. A perfect chance for passers-by to toss cabbages at you while commenting on your moral failings. You might think, well, at least I'm not dead yet. And technically, that's a win. But after a week of drowning in regret, even the town's gallows start to look like early parole. If you were a medieval thief who finally ran out of luck or blamed the chickens, your fate usually involved a rope, a wooden platform, and a polite little event called Execution Day at the market. Yep, the gallows had a schedule, but this wasn't some quiet midnight thing. Oh no, your grand finale was a community event. Kids were brought along. Street vendors sold snacks. If you were notorious enough, someone might write a cheeky ballad about you, medieval viral content. And the worst part, you usually had to wait. You might get told Monday you'll be hanged Friday. So you get the joy of drowning in fear, listening to guards crack jokes about your last words. By Friday, the whole town showed up. Not necessarily because they hated you, though some definitely did, but because public executions were the medieval version of reality TV. Everyone came for the drama, the spectacle, and maybe some roast chicken. The gallows setup was pretty simple: a wooden frame, a rope, and a trapdoor that drops out from under you. The key was efficiency, not ceremony. The goal: get the job done and move on with the workday. No last meal, no last words unless the executioner was feeling generous or needed a bathroom break. If you were lucky, the rope was tied right and your neck snapped instantly. If you weren't, well, honestly, if you were a medieval thief, luck wasn't your strong suit. The rope stretched, things got awkward, and just in case you thought people would forget you, nope, your body might hang for hours, sometimes days, as a warning sign, like a gruesome billboard saying, "Don't be a petty thief." Occasionally, a kindly priest would perform some last rites. Sometimes, a local artist would sketch the whole thing with unsettling detail. But mostly it was just you, gravity, and a town whispering, "That's the guy who stole 3 onions." So, say you somehow dodged dogs, stocks, iron bars, gallows, and every angry goose between here and the city gates. You survived. You even pulled off a few decent heists, a purse here, a roast duck there. Congrats. You are officially a successful medieval thief. Now what? Retire? Oh, sweet summer peasant, retire. A wooden structure, a rope, and a platform dropping out from under you. The most important detail is, it's all about efficiency, not fancy rituals. The point: get the job done and move on with your day. No last meal for you. No final words unless the executioner's feeling generous or really needs a bathroom break. If you're lucky, the noose is tied just right and your neck snaps instantly. If you aren't lucky, well, honestly, if you're a medieval thief, luck probably isn't your thing. The rope tightens and things get awkward, and if you think people will just forget about you, Nope. Your body might hang there for hours, sometimes days, as a grim reminder, like a horrifying billboard that reads, "Shoplifting is not recommended." Sometimes a kindly priest might give you last rites. Sometimes a local artist sketches the whole sad scene in disturbing detail, but mostly it's just you, gravity, and a town whispering. That's the guy who stole 3 onions. So say somehow you dodge the dogs, stocks, iron bars, gallows, and every angry goose between here and the city gates. You survive. You even pull off a few decent heists. A purse here, a roast duck there. Congrats, man. You are a successful medieval thief. Now what? Retire. Oh, sweet summer peasant. Retire. Not a thing. No pension plan. No beach house to write memoirs. No peaceful golden years. Okay. Your great-great-grandkids gather round asking how you escaped the bishop's pantry. If you're lucky, you live long enough to get too slow to steal and too old to get caught. That means you've graduated to begging, the medieval version of Social Security, and even that's no picnic. Towns require official begging licenses. Nope. Really, if you didn't have one, you were basically a cardio-challenged criminal. Begging without a permit could get you kicked out of town or tossed in a ditch. Some thieves tried going straight, maybe becoming laborers. The problem was, you were still branded, still infamous, lost 3 teeth, and had a sketchy resume. When your reference just escaped a one-time vendor and knows how to scale walls in under 30 seconds. Employers usually look elsewhere. And don't forget the other tempting option: becoming an informant. Snitch on your old pals for a few coins and a pat on the back until someone recognizes you. And boom, you're the week's cautionary tale at the local gallows. So, nope, no retirement plan, no thieves' union, no graceful fade into oblivion. Your choices: keep stealing until you get caught, or try begging and still get caught. Join a mercenary gang and maybe get stabbed by someone worse than you. Vanish into the woods and become a legend. Best case, the mysterious thief who disappeared after one last heist, even if he probably died face down in a puddle near some bushes. So when people say crime didn't pay in the Middle Ages, they weren't joking. You paid in bruises, scars, and a lifetime of worry. It all starts with good intentions, or at least according to official reports. In the early 1800s, England was getting gobbled up by industrialization. Cities like London and Manchester were overloaded, full of factory smoke, horse poop, and the one thing society feared more than poverty and madness. The old way to handle the mentally ill was to chain them up in private madhouses, lock them in rundown houses, or shove them behind closed doors, but that just wasn't cutting it anymore. Reformers like Quaker William Tuke in York started experimenting with something radical kindness. His ethical treatment model ditched whips and beatings for gardens, fresh air, and basic human decency. For a moment, it looked like the dawn of a more humane era, but progress can sometimes go sideways. The 1808 County Asylums Act changed everything. It let local authorities across England and Wales build publicly funded hospitals paid for by taxes, and boy, Did they build them? By mid-century, asylums had become massive institutions scattered on the outskirts of every major town. Their architecture was Gothic, scary, like fortresses. People thought they were temples of healing. Instead, they turned into dumping grounds for society's unwanted. The problem wasn't the concept, it was the execution. These new public hospitals weren't just for the seriously insane. They became trash bins for the inconvenient, unmarried mothers, alcoholics, epileptics, lepers, menopausal women. Anyone causing a ruckus or defying Victorian norms could end up here. Diagnoses were vague, often sexist, and deeply moralistic. If you were a woman with opinions, you might be labeled hysterical. If you were a man not working hard enough, you could be accused of melancholia or moral insanity. And once inside, good luck getting out. Asylums ballooned in size. Facilities that started with just 50 or 60 patients swelled to thousands. Overcrowding exploded. Funding couldn't keep up. Staff-to-patient ratios plummeted. Ethical treatment gave way to restraint. Straitjackets replaced gardens. Cold baths replaced conversations. In theory, Victorian asylums were supposed to be beacons of scientific progress. In reality, they became padded cells where progress went to rot. And this was just the beginning. Staff-to-patient ratios plummet. Kindness gets replaced by restraint. Straitjackets take over the gardens. Cold baths substitute for chit-chat. In theory, Victorian asylums were beacons of scientific progress. In reality, they became padded cages where progress rotted away, and that's just the beginning. So, what drove someone mad in Victorian times? Less science, more your social status, your gender, and whether your neighbors thought you were a little weird. Diagnoses in the 19th century were a mix of superstition, quack science, and moral judgment. Shake well, don't stir. Medical experts, called alienists, had huge power but very little evidence. They worked off thick manuals listing supposed causes of madness, from overwork and religious fanaticism to masturbation and reading novels. Yep, reading novels, especially if you were a woman. Victorian doctors were obsessed with female hysteria, a vaguely defined condition so broad it became a catch-all diagnosis for anything emotionally inconvenient. Mood swings, sexual desire, defiance, grief. A widow crying too long. That's hysteria. A woman standing up to her abusive husband. Hysteria. An unmarried woman over 30. Hilarious. Men weren't spared either under this moral judgment disguised as medicine, alcoholism, laziness, self-harm, or simply feeling down could land you in the loony bin. Moral madness diagnoses were especially popular. They described people with bad behavior, but no actual hallucinations. In other words, Victorians speak for, we just don't like this guy. Once committed, usually by a family member or some local judge, the patient got stuck in a system with almost no checks and balances. The legal requirement for commitment to medical certificates. That's it. No trial, no patient consent, no appeal. There were even cases of wives locked up by their husbands, suspicious of their power or just wanting to get rid of them entirely. Divorce was scandalous and expensive. Asylum was cheaper. Inside, the patient's diagnosis decided everything: their meals, their cell or private room, if they were lucky, and even whether they could talk or be talked to. Those considered easily agitated had to keep quiet. Violent ones got locked in padded rooms. If you were rich or well off, you might get a private cell with a window. If not, you shared a room with dozens of rats. Victorian medicine believed madness came from weakness, moral, mental, or sexual. Curing it, impossible. The goal was control. So the line between madness and inconvenience got really blurry. Diagnosis became a social discipline tool, more about obedience than care, and as we'll soon see, treatments were often worse than the disease. Once you were labeled crazy and locked up, next up was treatment. But at Victorian asylums, treatment didn't mean what you think. Forget therapy or meds. Treatment was often just a sanitized word for discipline or punishment disguised as medicine. Early on, some asylums clung to the idea of moral therapy, quiet environments, routines, fresh air, and kindness. But when patient numbers exploded and funding tanked, doctors switched to faster, harsher methods. Cold water immersion was a favorite. Patients dunked into ice baths, not to refresh them, but to shock their nervous systems into submission. Some were stuck in tubs for hours, tied down, shivering, and silent. The theory was madness could be soothed. Reality: hypothermia, trauma, and despair. Another popular trick was the tranquilizer chair, a creepy contraption invented by Dr. Benjamin Rush. Patients were strapped in, often blindfolded, limbs bound, and sometimes a box placed over their heads to block noise, supposedly to calm the senses. Actually, it was solitary confinement, plus a healthy dose of humiliation. Electroshock devices appeared early on, before modern ECT. Victorians experimented with crude, often dangerous electric gadgets. Patients got jolted with electric pulses, aiming to stir dormant brain regions or snap them back to alertness. Reality mostly terrified. Burned, or worse, bloodletting and purging were still big. These were medieval medicine leftovers. Doctors believed madness came from bodily fluid imbalances, so leeches and laxatives were used. Some even drilled, drilling a hole in the patient's skull to release pressure. This was an ancient treatment, with a success rate close to zero. For women, the treatments were downright sexist. Hysteria could be treated by forcing, celibacy, genital surgery, or if the doctor was especially creepy, manual stimulation, which led to the invention of the vibrator. Yep. The first vibrator was a medical device designed by Victorian doctors who truly believed female orgasms could cure madness. Then came the sedatives. Chloral hydrate and opium were used, not to heal, but to shut patients up. They'd become weak, zombie-like, and way easier to manage, especially in overcrowded asylums with one nurse for every 50 patients. Victorian mental hospitals didn't heal minds. They systematically broke patients down, coldly and often with official approval, and then, somehow, things got even worse from the outside. A Victorian asylum might look impressive and grand. Huge stone facades, manicured gardens, wide driveways. But don't be fooled, these buildings were designed not to heal, but to lock people up. The architecture screams control. It reflects the era's obsession with order, hierarchy, and surveillance. Many institutions used rigid designs called corridor plans or pavilion systems, letting them strictly sort patients by gender, diagnosis, or behavior. Women on one side, men on the other. Quiet patients near the center. Noisy or violent ones pushed to the edges. The asylum was a fortress of discipline. Tall, narrow windows, doors locked from the outside. Echoing halls amplified every footstep and whisper. Furniture bolted to the floor, beds with flimsy iron frames, no personal belongings, no privacy, and definitely no warmth. Every detail in this setup screamed, "You are not free." The director's office always sat at the center of many facilities, overseeing all wards, like a constant reminder you're being watched. Think of it as a psychological panopticon. You never know when they're watching, so you basically have to behave like they always are. Even the landscape played a role. Gardens weren't just for looks, they were tools of control. Patients were made to work there, trimming hedges and hauling dirt as part of their moral recovery. In reality, it was free labor designed to keep them busy and exhausted. Then there were the airing courts, outdoor spaces with walls, where patients were taken for fresh air. Not fun zones, more like outdoor jail cells. Men and women walked in circles under nurse supervision. Talking wasn't encouraged. Laughing was suspicious. Inside the asylum, rules were suffocating. You needed permission just to talk, sit, stand, or even use the bathroom. Breaking the rules meant punishment, isolation, restraints, or worse, even hope became dangerous. Grand illusions included thinking you might leave. Victorian asylums were machines cold, efficient mechanisms designed to classify, imprison, and forget anyone deemed unfit for the outside world. And once the door slammed behind you, it usually stayed shut for life. If you were a woman in Victorian England, the asylum was a silent threat, lurking behind every social misstep. The 19th century was the golden age of patriarchy. Women were expected to be obedient, silent sufferers. Anything outside that narrow ideal too loud, too sexy, too sad, too smart could land you labeled insane and sent straight to the asylum. Husbands, how easy it was to lock up your own wife. 2 doctors' signatures, no trial, no defense, no proof required. In one infamous case, a woman was institutionalized for religious excitement after attending too many church services. In another, a wife was locked up for arguing about money. But not all cases were that mildly absurd. Some were downright horrific. Women who'd suffered trauma, sexual abuse, postpartum depression, or miscarriage were often labeled hysterical instead of help. They got locked up and endured invasive treatments that left psychiatric wards seriously understaffed. Victorian medicine couldn't fix their pain, it just made them sadder, Even menopause was suspicious. Doctors thought it was a dangerous time for women's mental stability. Mood swings, hot flashes, and crankiness weren't seen as natural, but as signs of full-blown madness. Translation: middle-aged women had lost their minds and needed to be restrained. Teenage girls weren't much better off. A rebellious daughter, one who flirted too much, or even read too much, could be shipped off to an asylum for her own good. Once inside, youth and vulnerability made her an easy target for abuse by staff and other patients, and she might never leave. Sex was probably the most common reason women got locked up. The Victorians were obsessed with female purity, and any deviation from that ideal, real or imagined, was grounds for medical imprisonment. Masturbation, adultery, even overactive romantic fantasies were considered symptoms of insanity. The cure often involved sexual control. Doctors performed clitoridectomies and other surgeries, claiming these would fix hysteria or nymphomania. In reality, it was just violent torture designed to erase pleasure and force women into submission. Asylums became tools of social control, especially over women, a place where troublesome wives, curious daughters, and grieving mothers could be kicked out, silenced, and forgotten. The walls didn't just hold madness, they institutionalized misogyny, and no one outside dared ask too many questions. When we picture Victorian asylums, we usually imagine grown women in nightgowns wandering halls, whispering to themselves or staring out barred windows. But the most overlooked victims were at both ends of life, the very young and the very old. Kids weren't safe from these rehab camps either. Victorian society didn't quite see childhood as its own psychological phase. A misbehaving, slow-learning, or neurodivergent kid like one with epilepsy or autism was often just seen as dumb or weak. There was little understanding and even less sympathy. Whole wings of asylums and later separate institutions called children's asylums were built to house these kids. The treatment ranged from basic at best to outright abusive. Many were left in corners or tied up for hours. Education was limited to repetitive chores, if it existed at all. Some were sterilized under the guise of eugenics, and because families were ashamed or too poor to care, many kids spent their whole lives behind asylum walls. Then came the old folks, especially those with what we now call dementia, Parkinson's, or age-related mental disorders. Back then, these were lumped together under terms like senile mania. Poor elderly had very few options. If they were lonely, confused, or just couldn't manage on their own, the asylum door was open. Victorian poorhouses were usually the first stop. These brutal institutions were designed to punish poverty, but when an old person showed signs of mental decline, the poorhouse would ship them off to the asylum system. They were locked up with little hope of release or special care. Prisoners too young to understand or too old to fight back against crowded dorm rooms endured the same treatment and were often completely forgotten because they lacked advocates. These groups suffered in silence. No mail, no visitors, no voice. And since they weren't violent or disruptive, Staff often ignored them, just another warm body to sedate, bathe, and feed these patients old enough to resist the crowded dormitories, suffering similar fates and often completely forgotten. Because, with no advocates, these groups suffered in silence. No letters, no visitors, no voice. And since they weren't violent or disruptive, staff often ignored them. Just another warm body to tranquilize, bathe, and feed. These patients weren't treated as individuals. They were just burdens, mouths to feed in an overstressed system that couldn't handle it. In many orphanages, kids died of neglect. Older patients died from exposure, and no one kept proper records. In a world obsessed with order and morality, youth and old age were just two paths to downfall, and two solid reasons to be locked up. Not everyone just turned a blind eye to the horrors inside insane asylums. By mid to late 19th century, the public image of mental hospitals started to crack. Scandals leaked out. Patients were found dead under suspicious circumstances. Whistleblowers spoke up, and reformers jumped on the bandwagon. One of the earliest and loudest advocates for change was Dorothea Dix, American activist who toured British institutions and was horrified by what she saw. She wasn't alone. In England, folks like Louisa Lowe and John Percival, son of a British prime minister who'd been institutionalized, started publishing pamphlets and testimonies exposing abuse, illegal confinement, and living conditions so bad they defied description. These accounts were downright damning. Patients chained up for weeks, women drugged into silence to stop their protests, hygiene worse than a jail cell, sometimes even worse. Places like Hanwell and Colony Hatch became infamous for their size and cruelty. In 1859, Parliament passed the Lunacy Act, aiming to standardize mental hospital regulations. A Lunacy Commissioners Board was set up to inspect facilities and protect patient rights, but in reality, inspections were spotty and superficial. Managers had time to tidy up before visits. Yet abuse still happened in quieter corners. Meanwhile, reporters started digging. Undercover investigations revealed many patients weren't angry lunatics, but poor, struggling, inconvenient, or victims of family betrayal. Newspapers reported it all. Public outrage grew. Reform-minded doctors began questioning the system too. Some experimented with occupational therapy, music, and entertainment. They pushed for better training and raised care standards. Some places even built open wards where patients weren't locked in and could roam the grounds, a revolutionary idea back then. But progress was patchy. For every progressive asylum, there were 10 that stayed the same. Why? Because the system was profitable. Families could quietly pay to ship off relatives. Local authorities saved face by hiding those who looked unwell, and the public preferred comforting illusions over harsh realities. Reformers made noise, sure, but the machine kept grinding. While some patients found voices and advocates, most were locked in silence, forgotten, and sinking deeper into despair. The reform era had begun, but was far from over. In Victorian society, madness wasn't just feared, it was watched. Ironically, insane asylums weren't always hidden from public view. In fact, they often became local tourist spots. Visitors, whether curious, bored, or just looking for entertainment, could buy tickets to tour the wards. Partly spectacle, partly moral lesson. Look how lucky you are not to be like them. Not an exaggeration. Middle and upper class Victorians treated asylum visits like museum trips. Families packed lunch, took horse drawn carriages to the local mental hospital, and strolled past barred windows and cushioned cells as if they were watching animals at the zoo. Sometimes, attendants would point out patients who were particularly entertaining those screaming, dancing, or yelling at walls. That was the show, but the cast never auditioned. Even patients knew it. Some wrote letters begging to escape the humiliation of being on display. Others acted out crazily, believing that being insane enough might get them released, or at least noticed. But this spectacle went beyond mere curiosity. Acting crazy enough could get you released, or at least noticed, but this spectacle went way beyond curiosity. The madhouse also became a political stage. Doctors gave public lectures at their facilities to showcase their success stories and methods. Patients were paraded as trophies, often still in pain, but they were coached to say they were making progress. These exhibitions reassured donors and officials their cash wasn't going down the drain. Photography played its part too. The Victorian era gave birth to psychiatric portrait art series, creepy snapshots of patients striking awkward poses, sometimes with signs stating their diagnosis right there for everyone to see. These weren't family photo albums. Nope. They were for medical journals and public displays, hammering home the idea that madness had a face, a type. These faces became propaganda tools for control. And of course, literature and theater just ate up the whole asylum theme. Gothic novels like Jane Eyre and The Woman in White loved the madwoman in the attic trope, both villain and victim, always isolated, usually locked up, and rarely understood. These stories were basically society's way of airing its real anxieties about women, class, power, and that thin line between sanity and rebellion. In fact, Victorian asylums didn't just house the mad, they helped define what madness even meant. They were social mirrors, reflecting everything that era feared: disorder, deviance, sex, and losing control. And for many, being labeled mad wasn't the end of the road. It was a life sentence, whispered quietly and enforced through iron bars. By the late Victorian era, the asylum system had become a paradox, born from reform, fed by fear, and kept alive by silence. Institutions meant to offer refuge turned into permanent exile. The 20th century finally brought some overdue changes, though many gaps remained. But the shadow of Victorian asylums still lingers today. Many of the beliefs that created those institutions didn't vanish overnight. Ideas about unwanted behavior, gender roles, and moral madness slowly seeped into modern psychiatry, criminal justice, and even how families deal with illness behind closed doors. Many Victorian asylums lasted decades past their heyday. Those massive, crumbling buildings became symbols of all the awful things that happened inside. Some got converted into housing, others demolished, a few were abandoned. their decaying hallways still tagged with graffiti left by time itself. But what about the people, tens of thousands, died inside those walls? Some from illness, some from abuse, many from neglect. Their graves often unmarked, their records, if they survived, now sit in archives with tragic notes like, never speaks or supposedly possessed. They disappeared behind stone walls, while history marched on, yet their stories matter because Victorian asylums weren't just physical buildings, they were cultural machines, a society's way of teaching how to treat the vulnerable, isolate them, silence them, punish them for being inconvenient. And while we like to think we've evolved, the echoes of that system survive in underfunded mental health care plagued by stigma, in families too ashamed to talk openly, in prisons bursting with mentally ill inmates. This story has no easy moral. Victorians weren't cartoon villains. Many doctors truly believed they were helping. Some were kind. Some patients did improve. But good intentions couldn't erase the damage. What began as an attempt at compassion became a brutal, sprawling prison machine, ironically wrapped in humanity's failings. Today, we just walk past those asylum ruins, barely glancing at the plaques, but if you stop, you might feel that strange, heavy silence, the echo of untold stories, forgotten lives, voices never heard, and maybe that's the legacy worth remembering, a brutal, sprawling machine of imprisonment, soaked in humanity's failures. Today, we just stroll past these asylum ruins, barely glancing at the plaques, but if you pause, you can feel that weird, heavy silence, the echoes of untold stories, forgotten lives, voices never heard. Maybe that's the legacy worth remembering. Not just the institutions, but the people inside them, because what we choose to forget speaks as loud as what we remember. Cuchulainn wasn't your average royal. From the moment she popped out around 1260, she was destined to shatter expectations, not just as a woman, but as a warrior. Born in the heart of the Mongol world, an empire that conquered most of Eurasia in just a century, her dad, Kaidu Khan, wasn't some small-time dude. He was a fearsome leader, a direct descendant of Ogadai Khan, Genghis Khan's third son. Kaidu ruled the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia and was the ultimate rival to his cousin Kublai Khan, who controlled the wealthier lands over in eastern China. The Mongol world was huge, but fractured, and Kaidu was dead set on preserving the traditional Mongol moves fast, fierce, and straight out of a military playbook. From the get-go, Cuchulainn wasn't raised like some pampered princess. Nope, she was brought up like a warrior in Mongol culture. Girls learned to ride horses as soon as they could walk. Archery, horseback hunting, battlefield tactics, not just for the boys. But Cuchulainn took it way further. She didn't just learn to fight, she was damn good at it. By her teens, she was riding alongside her dad on military campaigns, commanding troops, and earning a rep not just as some noble lady, but as a natural force of destruction. Chroniclers like Marco Polo and Rashid al-Din said she stood out even among the toughest warriors of the time. Her physical strength, mind-blowing. She could slam grown men to the ground in wrestling matches. She charged into battle, wielding bows and spears with deadly aim. And she wasn't a sidekick. She was a commander who scared enemies and earned respect from her allies. Her upbringing was unusual for the Mongol world, but not totally unheard of. Mongol women had more freedom than their European or Islamic counterparts. Still, Kudalun shattered even those limits. She wasn't content with just managing household chores from behind the scenes. She wanted to fight, lead, and challenge what it meant to be a royal woman. She was a Khan's daughter, sure, but she was also a conqueror in her own right. And soon enough, the whole empire would know her name. Among all the stories about Kutulun, one stands, taller than the rest. One tale turned her from warrior to legend. When marriage age rolled around, Kutulun had already proven herself a fierce fighter, beating rival commanders and solidifying her spot beside her dad as a trusted military advisor. But one question still buzzed in the minds of rulers and neighboring royals who would marry her. Kutulun had an answer. She'd only marry a man who could beat her in wrestling, not archery, not sword fighting, wrestling. This was no joke. Mongol wrestling, or buk, was a high-class sport. One of the three manly skills alongside archery and horse riding. It demanded strength, balance, endurance, and serious grit. Matches could drag on for hours, and Kudalun didn't just join in, she dominated. She openly challenged anyone. Any guy who wanted to marry her first had to beat her on the wrestling mat. Lose you owed her a big herd of horses, usually 100 or so, but legends say it was even more, with suitors dropping like flies. Strong men, warriors, nobles all came in confident and left bruised and broken-hearted. Some tales, especially those hyped up by foreign travelers like Marco Polo, claim Kutulun amassed a herd of 10,000 horses from these failed suitors, literal or not. The message was crystal clear. She turned traditional courtship into a showdown of strength, and no man could match her. To her people, this wasn't shameful, it was inspiring. Kutulun became the living symbol of that ideal, fierce, free, and unbreakable. Defying convention didn't make her less feminine, it redefined it. She didn't totally reject marriage, but she refused to bow to weakness, status, or political convenience. Of course, her parents, especially any guy wanting to marry her first, had to beat her in wrestling, lose pay up with a hefty herd of horses, usually 100. Some legends say even more, and that they kept losing, one horse after another. Strong men, warriors, nobles, each came in confident and left with bruises and shattered pride. Some stories, especially those hyped up by foreign travelers like Marco Polo, claimed Kutulun racked up a herd of 10,000 horses from these failed suitors. Literal or symbolic, the message was crystal clear. She turned traditional courtship into a strength contest, and no man could keep up. To her people, this wasn't shameful, it was inspiring. Kutulun became the embodiment of this ideal, fierce, free, unbreakable, defying conventions. Didn't make her any less feminine. It redefined femininity. She wasn't totally against marriage, but she refused to surrender to weakness, status, or political convenience. Naturally, Her parents, especially her mom, weren't thrilled. Kaidu admired his daughter's talents, but also had dynasty ambitions. A strategic marriage could secure alliances, but Kutlun held firm. She wouldn't be bartered or tied down unless her chosen match could knock her out with his own strength. Nobody ever did. This vow wasn't just about love, it was a statement, a loud declaration that no man, no matter how rich or royal, could own her unless he earned it through force and respect. And on the wrestling ring, Kudalun was undefeated. Kudalun wasn't just a wrestling champ, she was a nightmare on the battlefield. From her teenage years, she rode alongside her dad, Kaidu Khan, leading campaigns all over Central Asia, the long war against Kublai Khan and the Yuan dynasty. This wasn't some ceremonial joyride. Kudalun fought in full armor, commanded troops, and called tactical shots that earned her the respect and fear of seasoned generals. Mongol warfare was brutal, lightning fast, and tightly coordinated. Cavalry maneuvers, fake retreats, ambushes, they were all part of the game, and Kudalun had them down cold. One story, probably exaggerated but based in truth, says she'd ride into enemy lines and capture prisoners as easily as a hawk snatches chickens. No poetry here. Mongols measured greatness by action. Her combat skills were so fierce that rumors flew her dad seriously considered naming her his heir, not just for his family or his herd, but for leading the entire Chagatai Khanate. That's huge. Mongol politics were deeply patriarchal, especially about succession. Leadership wasn't inherited. You had to win it and earn the backing of powerful male nobles and military leaders. Kaidu backing Kudalun meant she did more than just earn his trust. She repeatedly proved she was as good or better a commander than her brothers. But here's the catch. Kudalun had a ton of brothers, like 15 of them, and not all loved their sister, stealing the spotlight. Resentment simmered. Whispers of jealousy and scandal started spreading. Some even claimed her closeness to her dad was, well, weird. Others accused her of grabbing way too much power for a woman. Still, Kaidu stuck with her through countless campaigns against the Yuan and their allies. Kudalun remained one of his most trusted commanders, leading her unit straight into battle and snagging victory after victory. Soldiers followed her not because of her name, but because of her track record. She wasn't just a token female warrior. She was the real deal, and after every campaign, her legend only grew, not just a woman among men, but a warrior among warriors. As Kudalun's battlefield fame soared, so did the gossip. With her father, Kaidu Khan, she wasn't just a daughter, she was his right hand, his most trusted general, and, according to some sources, his favorite heir. While her brothers bickered and schemed, Kudalun stayed locked in loyalty. She was bold, strategic, and deadly effective in a world where trust meant life or death. Kaidu never doubted her, but the rest of the Mongol nobility, not so much. The idea of a woman inheriting power and ruling the entire Khanate, no less, was enough to shake up the stick-in-the-mud traditionalists. Sure, Mongol women historically had more freedom compared to medieval women elsewhere. They could own property, advise on politics, even join battles. But total takeover, that was a different story. When Kaidu's health started to fail, the succession problem got urgent. Kudalun was still the obvious choice, given her loyalty and achievements, but politics doesn't always reward merit. Brothers, cousins, and other Mongol nobles saw a chance to block her rise, and they started moving. Some spread rumors that her relationship with Kaidu crossed family lines. Others accused her of witchcraft or manipulating women to gain influence. This wasn't just idle gossip. These were calculated attacks aimed to tank her rep with the tribal council. But Kudalun didn't back down. She kept showing up beside Kaidu at military councils, commanding troops with unshakable confidence. Her power was obvious and undeniable, but it still wasn't enough. Even her dad started feeling the political storm brewing. Despite his steady support, he saw that naming her heir might split the Kaidu clan, or worse, spark a civil war after he was gone. Mongol rule depended on strength and unity. A succession fight could blow up everything he'd built. In the end, Kaidu never officially named Kudalun his heir, not because she wasn't worthy, but because her value made her a threat to the old guard clutching their power. She was dangerous to those stuck in the old ways. She fought harder, led better, and was more loyal than any man around her, and yet the throne remained just out of reach. For years, Kudalun stood firm. She only married a man who could beat her in wrestling. Nobody succeeded, and with every suitor sent packing without a horse, no less the legend of her grew, along with the pressure to break her vow. Kaidu's patience had limits, though he respected her independence and military skill. He was still a dad and, more importantly, a Khan with political duties. The Mongol world was built on strategic marriages, and Kaidu needed alliances to strengthen his grip against Kublai Khan and rival tribes. Having an unmarried daughter, even a fierce one like Kudalun, was a missed opportunity. Eventually, the tension got too big to ignore. Under pressure from advisors and other noble clans, Kaidu reportedly pushed Kudalun to rethink her terms. Politics were shifting. Her battlefield wins, though impressive, weren't enough to shield her from internal expectations anymore. So, Kudalun reluctantly married. The groom's identity remains a mystery. Some say he was accused of plotting against Kaidu, and the marriage was her way of proving loyalty, marrying the accused to clear his name. Others claim he was picked for political reasons, someone the tribal council deemed worthy, even if he couldn't beat her in sports. What's certain is Kudalun didn't marry for love, nor did she marry on her own terms. Her wrestling challenge disappeared. Her resistance, at least publicly, ended. But if her opponents thought she'd quietly fade into domestic life, they were dead wrong, even after marrying. Kudalun kept commanding armies. She still rode into battle. She stayed by her father's side until his final days. The title wife didn't change much about her role in the Chagatai Khanat's politics and military affairs. However, her marriage marked the start of a shift. The legend of the fierce warrior princess met the harsh realities of dynastic politics. Even Kudalun, no matter how fierce, couldn't fully escape the demands of the world she was born into. Still, she made her stance clear on the battlefield, in the arena, and in the hearts of her people. She was never truly defeated. Not exactly. Then in 1301, everything changed. Kaidu Khan, the powerful lord who challenged Kublai Khan, controlled the westward push and trusted his daughter more than any son died. His death sent shockwaves through the Chagatai Khanate without a clear heir. The succession line instantly cracked. Kaidu never officially named Kutlug Nigar as his heir, despite her unmatched military record and fierce loyalty right up until his last days. The title of wife didn't change much about her role in the politics and military of the Chagatai Khanate dynasty. However, her marriage marked the start of a shift. The legend of the fierce warrior princess met the harsh reality of dynastic politics. Even Kudalun, no matter how fierce, couldn't fully escape the demands of the world she was born into. Still, she made her stance clear on the battlefield, in the arena, and in the hearts of her people. She was never defeated. Well, not quite. In 1301, everything changed. Kaidu Khan, the powerful lord who challenged Kublai Khan, held back the western advance and trusted his daughter more than any son, passed away. His death shook the entire Chagatai Khanate. Without a clear heir, the line of succession was about to crumble. Kaidu never officially named Kutlug Nigar as his heir, despite her unmatched military record and fierce loyalty. Whether he feared political backlash or doubted the nobles would accept a woman, he left the throne open and the wolves moved in. Her brothers, especially Oris and Shapar, tried to fill the gap. Some say Kaidu whispered a name on his deathbed. Others insist they were the rightful heirs all along. What happened next was more than just a fight over succession, but it was also a power struggle loaded with betrayal, backstabbing, and violence. Kutlug Nigar didn't just sit still, even though she might not have been officially recognized as Khan's heir. She wielded more influence than most of her male relatives combined. Her support or opposition could make or break a claim. Soldiers still followed her lead. Local leaders respected her. Many believed she should be the ruler, and there are some scattered, controversial reports that Kutlug Nigar tried to snatch leadership right after Kaidu's death. If true, that'd make her one of the rare women in Mongol history, openly vying for power at the Khanate level. But things didn't go as planned. Tribal traditions weren't ready to accept a female Khan. No matter how capable, commanders who once praised her in battle turned to her brothers, fearing political chaos if the old patriarchal rules were broken. Opposition to Kutlug Nigar grew louder. Her options shrank. Eventually, Shapar grabbed power, backed by influential nobles and opportunists. Kutlug Nigar was pushed out of the game, but not completely erased. She kept commanding her territory, still a formidable force, still scary, but the Khanate's power slipped from her hands. It was a bitter turning point. The woman who fought beside her father for decades was denied the chance to lead. But Kutlug Nigar didn't disappear. She watched, advised, and waited, because even in defeat, she never gave up. When the dust settled after Kaidu's death and the succession fight cooled down, Kutlug-Nigar found herself in a weird spot, still strong, still feared, but increasingly isolated. Her brother, Chapar, held official control of the Khanate. Though his grip was shaky, he lacked Kaidu's charisma, Kutlug-Nigar's military skill, and the loyalty of many tribal leaders. Politics got messy. Alliances shifted fast. The Mongol Empire, once united by Genghis Khan's iron will, splintered into rival factions, each Khan more concerned with self-preservation than unity. Kutlug-Nigar remained on the edge of this chaos. She still led loyal warriors. She still advised on military matters. But the wide-open road to leadership was closed. Her role became more symbolic, a reminder of what might have been. Then, just as quietly as she appeared decades earlier, Kutlug-Nigar vanished from the records. She died in 1306, but the exact cause remains a mystery. No chronicles detail her final battle or whether she died at war or in peace. No grand funeral recorded. No epic poems composed at the time, just sudden silence. Some speculate she was assassinated by political enemies. Others think she died of illness. Some wonder if she chose exile, slipping into oblivion when it was clear her time was done. But the lack of details doesn't lessen the weight of her legacy. Kutlug-Nigar lived by her own rules, fierce, loyal, and unyielding. She bested every man who tried to conquer her. She rode into battle not as a general, but as a soldier. She earned her father's trust and nearly ruled in his place. In a world run by men, she stood equal and often superior to them. No husband ever beat her. No enemy ever conquered her, and even in death, she didn't fade from memory. While her brother's name slowly vanished into Mongol history, Kutlug-Nigar became a legend. Her name would conquered her. She rode into battle not as some big-shot general, but as a soldier. She earned her father's trust, and she almost ruled in his place. In a man's world, she stood shoulder to shoulder with them, often outshining them. No husband could beat her, no enemy could conquer her, and even in death, she didn't lose her edge in memory. While her brother's name slowly faded into Mongolia's forgetful history, Kutalin became a legend. Her name would live forever in campfire tales, whispered by wandering merchants, and finally inked into history books centuries later. She might have died quietly, but nothing about her life was peaceful. Kutalin's real-life presence faded in 1306, but her legend never died. For centuries, her story wasn't passed down in official chronicles, but through the word of nomads on the steppes. Merchants on Kutalin's actual presence might have vanished by 1306, but the legend of her never died. For centuries, her story wasn't passed down through official chronicles, but through the whispers of nomads, merchants along the Silk Road, and foreign travelers, all equally enchanted and puzzled by the memory of a woman who fought to carve her name into history. One of the first outsiders to mention her was Marco Polo, a Venetian traveler who visited the Mongol court at the end of the 13th century. He told tales of a warrior princess who could ride into enemy ranks and spot a man as easily as a hawk catching a chicken. Sure, Polo's stories were often over the top, but his description helped plant Kudalun firmly in Western imaginations, not just as a curiosity, but as a wonder. Later chroniclers like Rashid al-Din included her in their histories, focusing more on her wrestling skills and the unusual wrestling challenge she undertook to win her marriage. While the details vary, all accounts agree on the essentials. Kudalun was a woman of extraordinary strength, intelligence, and self-control in a world that rarely let women develop those qualities. Then came the transformation from legend to icon. Centuries after her death, Kudalun's story was retold in many forms. In the 18th century, her life inspired a French opera called Turandot. Although it was drenched in European style, in this version, Kudalun is a cold Chinese princess who refuses to marry any man unless he solves her riddle. Fail, and you get executed. This bloodthirsty twist has little to do with the real Kudalun, but it shows the power of her legend, strong enough to be reshaped, absorbed, and wildly misinterpreted across cultures. The most famous adaptation, of course, was Puccini's 20th century opera Turandot. Audiences worldwide heard Kudalun's story without even knowing her name. The woman behind the myth got lost in translation, but she was never erased. Today, historians and feminist scholars work hard to cut through the fog of fiction and restore the truth about her. In Mongolia and Central Asia, Kudalun is celebrated as a national hero, a symbol of women's strength and defiance. Statues have been erected in her honor. Her name lives on in popular retellings, both academic and poetic, because long after empires fell, the stories survived, and her tale still echoes like horse hooves on the terraces in a world still struggling with limits on who women are allowed to be and what they're allowed to achieve. Kudalun's story resonates louder than ever. She wasn't a hidden queen in a palace, nor a passive figure married off for diplomacy. She was a general, a wrestler, a strategist, and a daughter who could very well have been a ruler. Her life stands as a strong refutation of the idea that women in history were always silent, obedient, and sidelined. Kudalun was none of that. Today, all across Central Asia, the name Kudalun is spoken with pride. In Mongolia, she's hailed as a symbol of women's power, a true descendant of Genghis Khan, proving strength and femininity are not mutually exclusive. In wrestling circles, her name is spoken with reverence. Some even call her the spiritual mother of Bok, Mongolian wrestling. Women who take up arms or defy tradition are often compared to her. She's become a cultural symbol of defiance and fearlessness. Modern scholars and authors have also started restoring her story to its rightful place, while past generations remembered her through distorted, romanticized, exoticized, or misunderstood Western lenses. Contemporary historians are peeling back the layers to reveal the real Kudalun, not a fairy tale princess, but a real person who always wanted to live life on her own terms. She's inspired children's books, documentaries, and academic theses. Her legacy has even seeped into pop culture, appearing in shows like Marco Polo, where she's portrayed as a fierce warrior, unafraid to speak her mind, or challenging tradition. Sure, it's all dramatized, but at least these stories reintroduce her to modern audiences, inviting them to dig a little deeper. Her story is part of a bigger effort to rewrite history and make room for voices that have been ignored or misunderstood for way too long. Kudaloon isn't just a footnote in history. She's a whole chapter that was nearly erased, but now is back in the spotlight. And maybe that's her greatest win. She lived in a time when power was measured by strength, loyalty, and legacy. And guess what? She mastered all three. No man could beat her in sports. No army could defeat her in battle. And no culture, empire, or era could silence her completely. Kudalin lives on as a legend, a symbol, and proof that sometimes the fiercest warrior wears braids instead of a crown. Now picture a world with no hospitals, no operating rooms, or even a fixed address. Now imagine you're thriving there. For the nomads of the Eurasian steppes, from the Scythians and Sarmatians to the Turks and Mongols, this wasn't just a phase. It was a lifestyle, constantly on the move, chasing grasslands and dodging enemies. No time or place to build permanent bases, but they did develop a seriously effective medical system, flexible, adaptable, and mobile just like the people it served. Nomadic medicine didn't revolve around buildings or bureaucracy. It rode on horseback, tucked in saddlebags, and passed down through word of mouth, sharp observation, and spiritual rituals. No clinics, no white coats. The healer came to you, or sometimes rode right beside you in battle. This medicine was born from urgent necessity and refined over generations of deep knowledge about the land, animals, and humans. Nomads treated wounds out in the open fields, dealt with infections inside, felt tents, gave birth miles away from the nearest settlement. Their methods might look simple to modern eyes, but they were anything but crude. Their approach was holistic. Healing wasn't just about fixing physical symptoms. It was about restoring balance between body, soul, and spirit. Illness was often seen as the result of disharmony between the natural world, ancestors, or invisible spirits, so minority medicine was never just science. It was deeply spiritual, too. Knowledge didn't come from books, but from lived experience. Healers were usually shamans, elders, or those with a hereditary calling. They memorized plant lore, knew how to reduce fever with goat's milk or willow bark, and could set broken bones with leather straps and smooth river stones. But they also talked to spirits, performed cleansing rituals, and interpreted dreams. Nomadic medicine was built on resilience. You couldn't wait for an expert. You had to know how to act fast and smart. Every driver, every mother, every elder was expected to know a bit about health because survival depended on it. In a world moving with the wind and living on horseback, medicine had to keep up, and somehow it did. In nomadic medicine, the best healer wasn't a doctor in a white coat. It was the shaman. Shamans held a special place in the social hierarchy. They were healers, priests, psychologists, and performers all rolled into one, usually chosen through visions, dreams, or signs of spiritual sensitivity. Shamans were believed to walk between worlds, the physical and spiritual, the living and the dead, the visible and the invisible for a nomadic community. Illness wasn't just biology. It could be the result of offending a spirit, angering ancestors, or catching the evil eye from a demon's glare. Physical symptoms were explained through a spiritual lens. That's when the shaman stepped in, when someone got sick, especially without injury or a clear cause. The shaman was called, draped in elaborate robes made of animal fur, feathers, bones, and bells. They'd enter trance, sometimes aided by rhythmic drums, chanting or inhaling smoke from sacred herbs. In this altered state, the shaman tried to communicate with spirits to tracing the root of the illness. Healing rituals might involve sucking the sickness out with amulets or feathers, chanting protective spells, or using sacred objects like mirrors to reflect spiritual harm. Some rituals even call for animal sacrifices, milk, or incense to soothe the spirit world. But shamans weren't just spirit middlemen, they were legit healers too. Many had deep knowledge of herbs, midwifery, and emergency care. They could bandage wounds, reduce fevers, and treat common ailments. What made them unique? They saw body and soul as one, never separate. Interestingly, shamans often served many different communities along their routes. Their fame didn't spread on social media, but by word of mouth. A skilled healer might be summoned from hundreds of miles away to cure a patient. Gender roles were all over the place. In some cultures, shamans were mostly men. Elsewhere, especially among nomadic Turkic and Siberian peoples, female shamans earned equal respect. Some even had flexible genders, considered spiritually powerful because they existed outside usual roles. When illness struck, the shaman's tent was a place of both comfort and confrontation. Healing meant facing not just your pain, but the spirits hiding behind it. For nomads, health wasn't just survival, it was about balancing the world you walk through and the invisible world you can't see. With no pharmacies or drugstores, nomadic healers relied on whatever the land provided, and this step offered more perks than you think. The vast grasslands of Central Asia, Siberia, and the Caucasus weren't just horse and sheep pastures. They were pharmacies, stocked with plants, minerals, animal parts. Every natural element could be medicine. Knowledge of these remedies was passed down orally, guarded by elders, midwives, and shamans. Take mugwort as an example, popular across Eurasia. People crushed it into a paste to stop bleeding. Willow bark, which contains salicin, the precursor to aspirin, was brewed into tea to treat fevers and inflammation. Juniper berries were burned in purification rituals, but also brewed as a tonic for digestion issues and wound disinfection. Garlic, wild onions, and fermented mare's milk, known as ira, were often used to boost immunity. Herbal treatments weren't just about ingredients, they were about timing. Plants were harvested at specific times of the year, under certain moon phases, or after special rituals. Some herbs were dried and stored in leather pouches. Others had to be used fresh. Preparation was just as crucial as the plants themselves. Animal-based medicine had its place too. Tibetan yak fat or sheep fat was used to treat frostbite. People believed bear bile and deer antler dust could boost vitality. Horse milk, rich in vitamin C, was not only a daily drink but a popular remedy for weakness, fatigue, and even depression. Then there were stones and minerals. Crushed limestone was sometimes applied to wounds to dry them out. Sulfur was burned to cleanse diseased tents. Salt was essential, not just for preservation, but for cleaning and sterilizing. What stands out about nomadic pharmacology is its holistic nature. Medicines were rarely used alone. A cup of tea came with a prayer. A wound was treated while a charm was tied around the wrist. Physical and spiritual healing happened side by side. Healers knew their environment well. They could look at a patch of wildflowers and tell you which were safe to eat, which could soothe a cough, and which could kill you before breakfast. This knowledge wasn't written down. It was lived. And if you wanted to survive the open steppe, you didn't just need a sword. You needed someone who could spot the difference between root and poison. Nomadic life wasn't just about herding livestock on vast plains. It was war, raiding, and physical hardship. And just herding livestock or grazing animals on vast plains. Life was all about war, looting, and physical hardship. And when bones cracked or blood flowed, healing had to be quick, smart, and flexible. Battlefield medicine was a crucial skill for nomads, especially warrior cultures like the Scythians, Huns, Turks, and Mongols. In these societies, everyone knew how to ride and fight, meaning injuries were as common as bad hair days, from broken ribs to deep cuts. Nomad healers had to act fast, usually armed with just a single pouch of tools and sharp wits. Bone setting was like the crown jewel of their healing arts. Dislocations, fractures, joint injuries handled with surprisingly advanced techniques. They'd use animal feathers or strips of rawhide as makeshift splints. Smooth stones or carved bones held limbs still. Dislocated joints got popped back into place, with controlled leverage part art, part brute force. Wounds were cleaned with boiled water, fermented milk alcohol, or herbal tonics. Cauterization was a thing too, heating a metal tool over fire, then pressing it onto wounds to stop bleeding and fight infection. Painful. Oh, absolutely. Effective. Definitely. This was the difference between life and death before antibiotics were a thing. Stitching wounds was also a go-to. Horsehair or sheep, gut made for thread. And bone needles are pretty common. Wounds got stitched up, then sealed with natural resins or animal fats to shield wounds from dirt and germs. In serious cases, bloodletting was often used not always out of superstition, but as a method to reduce swelling, bruising, or bodily imbalances. Horns, blades, and even leeches were employed depending on the tribe and situation. Interestingly, battlefield surgery didn't only happen after fights. It often went down during battle. Some shamans or senior warriors carried small kits to bandage wounds mid-fight. Quick thinking and field bandages kept soldiers fighting longer and stopped infections before they got out of hand. Even dentistry wasn't spared. Cracked or rotten teeth got yanked out with iron tools for toothache relief. They used a mix of clove oil, ground bone, and wild herbs stuffed straight into the gum. Nomads didn't have time for long recoveries. Their medicine had to be portable, fast, and effective. Ugly, sure, but it worked. And when danger lurked just over the next hill, that was what mattered most. For nomads, childbirth was both a blessing and a battleground. No fixed shelter, no formal obstetricians, so giving birth on the steppe was a risky but sacred event, almost entirely handled by women combining experience, herbal knowledge, spiritual rituals, and sheer grit. Midwives were the MVPs here. They weren't officially trained, but carried knowledge passed down through generations by watching and word of mouth. These women knew how to position babies just right, calm mothers in labor, and act fast when things went sideways. Births usually happened inside yurts or Gears-felt tents that were warm, clean, and private. Moms squatted, stood, or leaned on another woman during delivery. Positions used gravity to help speed labor and cut down on the agony. Midwives tracked baby's position, regulated mom's breathing, and massaged her belly to encourage contractions. Pain management came via herbal remedies and rituals. Tea made from valerian root or wild poppy soothed nerves. Juniper smoke was burned to cleanse the air and ward off evil spirits. Amulets, charms, and whispered blessings gave that extra sense of protection. If complications hit premature birth, bleeding, stuck placenta midwives had few options but lifetime intuition. Herbs like shepherd's purse or mugwort helped stop bleeding. Acupressure and warm compresses were used to reposition the baby. In rare cases, they might attempt manual delivery, a risky move, but sometimes the only choice. After the baby arrived, warm mare's or sheep's milk, acupressure, and warm compresses helped reposition fetuses. In rare cases, manual delivery was attempted, a risky move, but sometimes the only choice. After birth, warm mare's milk or sheep's milk was often baby's first meal, especially if mom was weak. The umbilical cord was cut with a sterilized knife or hot stone, then tied with a cord soaked in alcohol or salty water. The baby was wrapped in wool and rubbed with protective oils, sometimes soot or oil smeared on forehead or chest. Infant mortality was sky high, but when both mom and baby survived, it was a cause for huge celebration. A newborn isn't just a baby, it's the future of the clan. Another knight stepping onto the endless path. For nomads, that means a lot. Not every illness comes from wounds or bad weather. Sometimes the body just goes sideways with no clear reason. A man weakens even if he eats well. A kid stops talking. A warrior gets nightmares and refuses to ride. This isn't just sickness. It's a sign of spiritual trouble. For nomads, invisible stuff is as real as visible stuff. They believe mental imbalance, curses, or offended ancestors can cause illness. This isn't superstition, it's their reality, where health depends on harmony between body and spirit. When someone suddenly falls mysteriously ill, they don't always call the midwife or bone setter. They call the shaman. The shaman checks symptoms, not just physical stuff, but emotional and behavioral changes too. Is the patient talking to invisible things, getting shut down, really angry, or scared? Those are clues this illness comes from another world. Diagnosis involves rituals. The shaman burns herbs like mugwort or juniper, chants prayers to ancestors, or uses objects like bones, mirrors, or drums to read the spirit world. The illness might be caused by a wandering soul, an angry ancestor, or some demonic force. Sometimes they say a soul has left the body and gotten lost. To heal, the shaman performs a soul retrieval ceremony. Drama alert: the shaman might wear flashy costumes, mimic animal behavior, or speak in weird voices. All this to catch the soul's attention, negotiate its return, or scare off harmful spirits. Amulets get tucked under pillows. Protective tattoos are drawn. Salt circles get sprinkled around tents. Some shamans sacrifice animals, offering sheep or goat blood to appease the spirit world. For more common spirit illnesses, nightmares, infertility, or melancholy, they hold smaller ceremonies. Dream catchers made of bone, feathers, and thread hang over sleeping areas. Special songs get sung. Milk or vodka is poured out as offerings. What modern medicine would call trauma, depression, or mental disorders. Nomadic societies heal through stories, rituals, and deep community care. This illness isn't just your problem, it hits the whole tribe. Healing means bringing the entire world back into balance without medical schools or manuals. How did nomads preserve and pass on medical knowledge? The answer: collective memory. Nomadic medicine isn't locked in universities or elite circles. It lives in the mouths of elders, in mothers' hands, and in the daily lives of riders, hunters, and healers. It's community knowledge, passed down through stories, remembered in tales, and honed by real-life experience on the open steppe. Kids grow up seeing wounds from horse falls treated, fevers soothed with herbal steam. By adulthood, they know the basics: how to stop bleeding with moss, brew root teas for belly aches, and recognize signs of spiritual suffering. This knowledge isn't taught in classes. It's woven into everyday life. Elders play a key role, especially the women, who are walking encyclopedias of medical wisdom. They know which plants to pick in spring, how to make salves for swollen joints, or how to ease labor pains with rhythmic chants and breath control, remembered through stories, refined by lived experience on the open steppe. Kids grew up watching wounds from horse falls get treated or fevers soothed with herbal steam. By adulthood, they knew the basics: how to stop bleeding with moss, brew root tea for stomach aches, and spot signs of spiritual distress. This knowledge wasn't taught in classrooms. It was woven into daily life. Elders played a big role, especially women, who were walking encyclopedias of medical knowledge. They knew which plants to pick in spring, how to prepare sap for swollen joints, or how to ease labor pains with rhythmic chanting and breath control. Many acted as informal family doctors, both healing and telling stories packed with coded advice and health tips. Shamans trained Apprentices not through classes, but hands-on guidance. A chosen student might spend years learning to interpret dreams, prepare ritual tools, or safely enter trance states. This training was personal, intuitive, and deeply spirituality, no exams. But failing could spell disaster for both patient and healer. It's all about community nature. The communal nature of this knowledge means nomadic medicine is adaptable. If a new herb pops up during migration to a strange land, its effects get tested, passed on orally, and shared. New treatments might first be tried on sick animals before humans get involved. If it works, it becomes tribal wisdom. Oral tradition has its flaws. A disease outbreak can wipe out entire clans and their medical smarts, but it's also got its perks. It's flexible, dynamic, and tough as nails. It moves with the tribe, changes with the seasons, and adapts to new threats. In a world that's always shifting, the only constant is memory not written in books, but in the rhythm of daily life, knowledge passed down not through pens, but through firelight, sweat, and stories. For nomads, animals aren't just buddies or cargo, they're lifelines. Horses, sheep, Tibetan yaks, goats, and camels are the backbone of their economy, culture, and even spiritual life. So animal health care is as important as healing people, sometimes even more. Veterinary medicine is a parallel system, often overseen by the same folks who treat people. In fact, the line between animal and human medicine is pretty blurry. If something cures a goat, chances are it'll work on a person too, and vice versa. The bond between rider and horse creates deep understanding of physiology, injuries, and recovery. Common ailments like hoof rot, skin infections, respiratory issues, or parasites get treated with herbal mixes, picuses, and smoke. Smoke from juniper and mugwort isn't just for humans. It's waved over stables to disinfect the air and scare off bugs. Fleas and ticks get the garlic crush treatment rubbed into their fur or skin. For deeper infections or open wounds, healers use red-hot metal. Just like with people, horse or sheep fat gets smeared on wounds to prevent cracking and speed healing, especially in winter. Broken bones in animals are rare but not impossible, treated with wooden splints and tight leather wraps, followed by mandatory rest. The animal might be tied up or kept close to camp while healing. Colic in horses, a potentially deadly gut issue, is treated with massage, herbal tonics, and sometimes a brisk walk to jumpstart digestion. For dairy animals, mastitis udder infection gets warm compresses and constant milking to relieve pressure. Remarkably, these treatments come without books, tests, or fancy diagnostics. They come from generations of close observation and living side by side with the animals. A nomadic herder can glance at a camel's gait and know something's off. A woman can hear a sheep's bleat and spot a fever. The spiritual angle is never far away. People believe animals have souls too, just like humans. A shaman might bless a sick horse or perform cleansing rituals for a diseased herd, because when animals die, people don't just lose property, they lose mobility, milk, meat, and their livelihood. Healing the herd means healing the heart of nomadic life. Even though modern hospitals, pharmaceuticals, and global healthcare have changed our view of medicine, the legacy of nomadic healing still survives. It's quietly resilient, often overlooked, but incredibly durable. Many remedies once carried in leather pouches and passed down in windy tents have been proven by modern science. Nomadic life, sure, modern hospitals, pharmaceuticals, and global healthcare have shaken things up, but how we see medicine has evolved. Yet the nomadic healing legacy quietly sticks around. It's like the stubborn underdog with surprising staying power. Many remedies once stuffed in leather pouches and passed down in windy tents have now been backed by modern science. Willow bark, yep, that's the natural ancestor of aspirin. Juniper smoke, believed to have antibacterial mojo. Believed to have antibacterial mojo. Techniques like bone setting, herbal acupuncture, and warm compresses still get the job done worldwide. Some methods unchanged for centuries. But it's not just the remedies. The philosophy behind nomadic medicine still speaks to us today. This step-by-step healing approach is built on adaptability. It doesn't rely on sterile labs or climate-controlled systems. It's all about observation, creativity, and staying connected to nature. The goal isn't just curing, it's balance, restoring harmony between body, community, the spiritual worlds, and the land. This mindset is making a comeback in a world drowning in fast, synthetic fixes, and soulless healthcare systems. More and more, people want holistic medicine, herbal treatments, and respect for traditional knowledge. What used to be dismissed as superstition is now being reconsidered as a body of practical knowledge tested, tweaked, and preserved through sheer survival necessity. In Mongolia and across Central Asia, nomadic medicine is still alive. Healers still brew tea from wild herbs, perform shaman rituals, and teach kids to spot the signs of sick animals or the first symptoms of frostbite. Even in modern communities, traces of this tradition survive, woven into cultural identity, like threads through felt. Of course, not every step-by-step treatment is safe or effective. Some rituals lean more on belief than biology, but human understanding, emotional health awareness, the power of community care, and nature's role in healing have stood the test of time. Nomadic medicine teaches us that healing doesn't need fancy tech to work. Care can happen in a tent, on a mountain, or out in the void. Healers don't need degrees to be wise. Effectiveness. It proves care can happen in a tent, on a mountain, or in the middle of nowhere. Healers don't need fancy degrees to get wise. Health is more about connection to people, places, purpose, and biology. And in that lesson, the footprints still say something.